The humid morning air at Dedham Airfield clung to Corporal Samuel Miller's coveralls as he stared at the stack of after-action reports. It was the 6th of March, 1944, and the words on the page blurred into a single grim statistic: 7 pilots from the 4th Fighter Group, all lost in the past month. The official cause: loss of control during high-speed engagement. He'd heard the pilot's own term for it in whispered, frustrated conversations outside the mess hall. Control surface lockup. The ailerons, those vital control surfaces on the wings, were freezing solid, turning their P-51B Mustangs into unwieldy spears, sealing the fate of the men inside. The phone on the wall of the maintenance hangar rang, its sharp jangle cutting through the drone of a nearby engine test. Miller picked it up, his voice a low grunt. The voice on the other end was Lieutenant Harris, a pilot with 11 missions and 0 kills to his name. His voice was strained, not with fear of the enemy, but with frustration at his own machine. "Corporal, it's happening again. Over Bremen, I had a 109 in my sights, dove after him, and around 450 indicated. Nothing. The stick just locked up solid. I watched him fly away. I am telling you, Mill, the airplane is fighting me." Miller grunted again, hanging up. He'd been an aircraft mechanic since before the war, first with civilian planes in Ohio, now with the fiercest fighter in the USAAF inventory. He understood metal, stress, and airflow better than he understood people. But he understood the finality of a closed coffin. The 7th pilot, a young redhead from Texas named O'Malley, had been a friend. He'd signed off on O'Malley's aircraft himself, 24 hours earlier. It had been perfect by the book. But the book, he was starting to believe, was wrong. He walked out of the hangar into the flat English light. A P-51B, serial number 43 to 12,455, sat on its hard stand, its ground crew performing the daily pre-flight. This was Harris's aircraft. Miller ran a hand along the wing's leading edge, his eyes tracing the line of the aileron. The problem wasn't the pilot. It was a fundamental flaw in the control system's geometry. At high speeds, approaching compressibility, aerodynamic forces were jamming the mechanism. It wasn't a design flaw, not exactly. It was a design limitation, one that hadn't been apparent in testing, but was deadly in the crucible of combat over Europe. For Miller, it was no longer an abstract engineering problem. It was the memory of O'Malley's laughter in the pub, now silenced. He made a decision. It was a decision that violated a dozen regulations, could end his career, and might even be seen as sabotage. But the alternative, waiting for an 8th report, likely with Harris's name on it. The choice was simple: break the rules or bury another friend. He gathered his tools, a standard wrench set, a screwdriver, and a length of 0.032-inch safety wire. The ground crew looked at him, questioning. "Lieutenant's orders," Miller lied, his voice steady, adjusting the aileron travel. They nodded, stepping back. He worked with a focused intensity, the kind born of certainty. He didn't need new parts. He needed to change the relationship between the existing ones. He carefully loosened the bolt on the aileron control horn, the component that translated the pilot's stick movements to the wing surfaces. The modification was deceptively simple. He didn't alter the structure, but he subtly changed the geometry of the linkage. It wasn't about increasing the range of motion, but about ensuring the available motion remained effective under load. It took him 8 minutes. He tightened the final bolt, secured it with the safety wire, and wiped the sweat from his brow with a greasy rag. He hadn't built something new, he had fixed something broken. The risk was immense. If his calculations were off by even a fraction, he could make the problem worse. The aircraft could disintegrate, or it could save a life. When Lieutenant Harris arrived for the afternoon mission, a bomber escort to Schweinfurt, Miller met him on the tarmac. "Sir," he said, his voice low. "I've made an adjustment. You'll feel it around 350. Don't fight it. Trust it." Harris looked at him, a long, searching look. He saw no arrogance in Miller's eyes, only a cold, hard resolve. He didn't ask for details. He just nodded, a grim understanding passing between them. He climbed into the cockpit, the familiar ritual now imbued with a new tension. He didn't know if his plane would now kill him faster. The Mustangs of the 4th Fighter Group roared to life, one by one. Harris's aircraft taxied out with the others, but Miller felt as though it carried a piece of him into the sky. The mission clock ticked away. Miller stayed in the hangar, ostensibly repairing a landing gear actuator, but his mind was over Germany. He'd either given Harris a fighting chance or signed his death warrant. 5 hours later, the returning Mustangs appeared as specks in the evening sky. Miller counted them, his heart thudding. 1, 2, 3, his breath caught. A lone aircraft, trailing smoke, lagged behind the formation. It was Harris. The aircraft landed hard, but it landed. As the engine spooled down, Harris practically launched himself from the cockpit, his face alight with something Miller hadn't seen before, pure, unadulterated victory. They vectored us onto a group of 109s trying to get at the bombers. I got on one's tail, we dove, kept diving. I hit 400, 420 mil, the ailerons. They were heavy. God, they were heavy, but they worked. I followed him down, stayed with him through the turn he tried to make. I got him. I finally got one, Miller just nodded. The tension draining from his shoulders. The fix worked. It wasn't a fluke. It was physics. But physics, in the military, was subject to approval. Over the next 2 weeks, a quiet revolution took place at Dedham. Miller, with Harris's enthusiastic and secretive help, modified 6 more aircraft, choosing pilots who had complained of the same issue. The results were immediate and undeniable. The pilots reported a dramatic improvement in high-speed control. The stick forces were higher, around 140 pounds of pressure for full deflection instead of the original 200. But it was a manageable, linear increase. Where the stick had previously locked solid, it now yielded to muscle, translating a pilot's will into combat maneuverability. The pilots of the modified aircraft began scoring kills. The evidence was no longer just whispered complaints. It was marked by swastikas on their fuselages. The problem, once hidden in vague reports, was now starkly visible in combat records. The aircraft that hadn't been modified continued to see pilots simply fail to return, another entry in the ledger of unknown causes. But secrecy on an active airbase is a fragile thing. On the 24th of March, a memo from 8th Air Force Headquarters landed on the desk of the group commander, Colonel James Harding. It demanded an immediate explanation for unauthorized, non-standardized, and potentially hazardous field modifications to primary flight control systems. The memo from 8th Air Force Headquarters landed on Colonel James Harding's desk with the subtlety of a bomb. The words, unauthorized modifications, and primary flight control systems seemed to burn through the paper. The maintenance logs showed Miller's signature on the work orders, each one reading, adjusted aileron linkage per pilot request. It was technically true, yet a profound deception. Harding summoned Miller to his office that same afternoon. The colonel's office was spare, dominated by a large map of Europe studded with pins. He didn't offer Miller a seat. "Corporal," Harding began, his voice dangerously calm, "would you care to explain to me why my pilots are winning engagements at speeds that should have killed them, and why I have a letter from headquarters suggesting I am harboring a saboteur?" Miller stood at attention, his eyes fixed on a point just past Harding's shoulder. "Sir, the standard control assembly fails under high dynamic pressure. The forces bind the mechanism. The modification alters the leverage ratio to prevent binding. He spoke like the technical manual he was accused of violating. Harding leaned forward. You've modified 18 airframes without engineering approval, without testing, and you've sent pilots into combat with experimental changes to their aircraft. Do you understand the gravity of that? Yes, sir. I also understand the gravity of sending a pilot out in a machine we know has a fatal flaw, Miller replied, his voice gaining a sliver of defiance. 7 pilots died. Lieutenant Harris would have been the 8th. Now, he has 3 confirmed kills, all in modified aircraft. The regulation exists for a reason, Corporal. So does the oath I took, sir. Miller's voice was steady now. The pilots were instructed that this increases stick forces from about 200 pounds to around 140. It's a linear response. They know precisely how much force to apply before. They had no idea what to expect. The aircraft was unpredictable. The Army Air Corps doesn't run on predictability. It runs on procedure. Harding slammed his hand on the desk. Who gave you the authority to rewrite the blueprints? The enemy did, sir. The silence in the room was to the window, looking out at the rows of Mustangs. I have a squadron commander downstairs who says you've created the best handling P-51 in the entire group. The investigation was swift and thorough. Engineering officers from headquarters descended on Dedden, their faces grim. They inspected every modified aircraft with meticulous care, measuring control surface travel, checking tensions. What they found contradicted their assumptions. The work was flawless. The safety wiring was perfect. The logic of the modification was sound. It was, by any objective measure, a brilliant piece of field engineering. On the 30th of March, Colonel Harding watched a demonstration flight. Miller had modified Harding's own personal aircraft. If you are going to court, marshal me, sir. You might as well know what for. Fly it. Push it past 400. See for yourself. That afternoon, Harding took the modified P-51B to altitude. At 20,000 feet, he put the aircraft into a steep dive. The needle swept past 450 miles per hour, then 475. He moved the stick. It fought him, but it moved. The aileron responded. He landed, taxied back, and cut the engine. He sat in the cockpit for a long time before emerging. Corporal Miller, he said, his expression unreadable. I have recommended to 8th Air Force Command that your modification be formally evaluated for fleet-wide implementation. The following week, a team of engineers from North American Aviation arrived at Dedden. They were skeptical, defensive of their design. For 2 days they examined the modified aircraft, scrutinizing Miller's work. They ran calculations, debated stress points. The lead engineer, a man named Dr. Walsh, initially called it a reckless field expedient. But the data was overwhelming. The modified aircraft consistently outperformed the standard ones in high-speed scenarios. They could find no structural compromise, only enhanced functionality. On the 2nd of April 1944, an official technical order was issued, standardizing the modification across all P-51B and C models. It became known officially as the Dedden mod. The paperwork was bureaucratic, dry. It authorized a change to the aileron control horn geometry, specifying the use of 0.032-inch safety wire for positive retention. The order carried an effective date of the 6th of March, the day Miller had first decided to act. In the end, the rules had to change to accommodate reality. The modification was credited with saving an estimated 180 pilot lives and contributing significantly to the achievement of air superiority over Europe in 1944. Miller received a formal letter of commendation which mentioned his initiative, but carefully omitted the words unauthorized, violation, or disciplinary action. The story didn't end with the technical order. It became part of the 4th Fighter Group's lore. But the deeper implications rippled through the command structure. It proved that the most valuable insights often came from the men with grease under their fingernails, who understood these machines not as drawings, but as collections of metal and physics that ate men when they were wrong. It demonstrated that in a war of industrial attrition, small, intelligent interventions could yield disproportionately large results. It wasn't about building more, it was about making what they had work better. This was a different kind of warfare, one where a single corporal with the right idea could impact the fate of hundreds. The P-51B, with its Malcolm Hood canopy, and now the modified control system, became one of the most capable fighters in the European theater. The pilots who flew these modified aircraft developed a profound trust in their machines. They knew they had the advantage in a dive, the one escape vector German pilots had relied upon. Now, that door was closed. A Luftwaffe pilot diving to escape a pursuing P-51 would find the American aircraft remaining firmly in control on its tail, able to follow them into regimes of flight that had previously been a sanctuary. The modification didn't just change the stick forces, it changed the entire tactical calculus. American pilots could now press their attacks with confidence, knowing their aircraft wouldn't betray them at the critical moment. The psychological impact on German pilots was devastating. Their last tactical refuge, superior high-speed control, had been systematically eliminated by a maintenance corporal. In the grand strategy of World War II, the deaden mod was a minor footnote. But for the pilots of the 4th Fighter Group, it was the difference between life and death, between victory and another mournful entry in the loss ledger. Samuel Miller never considered himself a hero. He was a mechanic who fixed broken things. In the spring of 1944, the most broken thing wasn't any single aircraft. It was a flawed assumption in a technical manual that had cost 7 men their lives before someone decided the cost of compliance was higher than the cost of defiance. He had looked at the regulations and the wreckage, and chosen to prevent more of the latter. The story is a testament to the idea that sometimes the most profound changes begin not in a general's office, but under the wing of a fighter plane, where the only thing that mattered was whether the machine brought its pilot home.